All right. Well, thank you for being here and for coming. This is a wonderful opportunity to be together again. What's this, after 3 years? It's been a little while since we've been able to do this. Well, at the beginning, 1970, a new comic strip came into being, came into syndication. And it's always a single frame comic. And it was titled, Love Is... And a woman by the name of Kim Casale, she's the one that created that comic. She created it based on love notes that she had written up for her then future husband, Robert. And these comics were always in the same format. At the top of the frame, you would have the word love is... And the middle frame would be the cartoon. It would be cartoon boy and a girl. And then underneath of it, you would have whatever the statement would be for that day. Now, Kim Casale died in 1997, but the comic still remains in syndication today. And you might be able to even see it. Perhaps you're even familiar with some of these Love Is comics. Some of the examples of the Love Is are these. Love is the relationship you thought you'd never have. Love is when I couldn't imagine being with anyone else. Love is being able to say you're sorry. Now, the focus on all of these Love Is comics was very simple. And that's probably the appeal that it had to everyone. It was probably the reason these comics would speak to everyone's heart. Today, we live in a world with a multitude of misguided ideas of exactly what love is. People talk about falling in love as if it's some sort of an accident. You tripped and fell into love. Christians today say you have to have love in your heart, or if you love the Lord, then you don't need anything else. Doesn't take much to see there are a lot of very vague, fuzzy ideas of what love actually is. Now, we're told in 1 John 4 and verse 8 that God is love. So we know God is love. We also know from John 3:16, God so loved the world, He gave His only begotten Son. The Bible tells us these things. Now, we've known, and we've also come up over the years, there are several words from the Greek that are translated into our English word love. The first one is the word eros. Eros, and it means that sensual, passionate, romantic love. There's another Greek word, phileo. Phileo, or some variation of it, means brotherly love. And it means to be a friend, to have affection, to have an attachment for. Now, the words for God's love, the word for God that He has for our fellow Christians is that love that's called agape. We hear about that quite a bit. It's that love that values and esteems. It's an unselfish love. It's that love that's ready to do whatever it takes to serve. It is a godly love. As you know, this weekend we are to be talking about relationships. So today what I want to do is I want to focus our attention on a type of love, this filial love, that we probably rarely talk about. But that's what I want to look at it today. But I want to look at it perhaps a little differently. I want to look at it not only in terms of friendship, but also through the lens of marriage, a marriage relationship. I'm not going to only be talking about marriage today, but that's kind of the focus that I want to go through. Now, love is at the core of the marriage relationship, or it should be at the core. It's interesting, love in a proper marriage actually contains all three of the different components of love. There should be a physical desire. There should be this unselfish, outgoing concern toward your spouse. But there should also be this component that I believe, sadly, is missing in too many marriages today, and that is the love of friendship. That's one of these main components of a good marriage, and that is your spouse should be your very best friend. How often do we look at it like that? Today, in today's world, when you talk about friendship, most often it's viewed through social media. How many friends do you have on social media? How many followers do you have on social media? And you see all these interactions. People post all their vacation pictures, what they had for dinner, what the kids accomplished, or they're sharing videos, or perhaps they're voicing their opinion on the latest political goings on. And those things can help us stay connected to others, but they are not the building blocks of a close relationship. It's ironic because having friends, having followers on social media, when you look at it, is actually eroding real friendships. You see all the time these feelings of loneliness and despair from people, and they'll have thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of followers. It doesn't matter the age limit. They have lots of connections, no real friends. And that's because our modern lifestyle actually works against friendship when you look at it. Just about everyone, they're over busy, they're overstretched, they're overscheduled between work or classes, kids and their activities, household chores. There isn't a lot left to develop friendship, to nurture these friendships. You may talk to coworkers. You may send people messages via text. What are they? They're not deep conversations, are they? It's, hi, how are you doing? Very simple things. That includes our marriages, doesn't it? In a lot of cases. You look at, that's our very best friend. How much interaction do we have? And yet God created us to have more than that simple connection through social media. We need true biblical friendships. And to do that, you must have that friendship kind of love. Let's go to Ecclesiastes 4. Let's begin there today. Ecclesiastes 4. I want to read verse 9. Now I'm going to read it out of the Good News Bible. You can follow along. I like the way the Good News Bible states it here. In Ecclesiastes 4, in verse 9, it says, 2 are better off than one, because together they can work more effectively. Drop down to verse 11 and 12. It says, if it is cold, 2 can sleep together and stay warm. But how can you keep warm by yourself? 2 people can resist an attack that would defeat one person alone. A rope made of 3 cords is hard to break. You see, true friends stay by our side, beside, all the fun times there are. That's not why they're there. They're there to support us. They're there to also motivate us. You think about it, we're all in the same race, aren't we? That race toward the kingdom of God. So our true friends are there to help and to support us. There's this shared commitment to God's way of life. There's a commonality. There's this desire to please Him, to glorify Him by how we live our lives. See, that's the essence of biblical companionship. That's the essence of this fresh friendship component of love that we are to have, and especially within our marriages. So how can we grow this type of love in our lives? This brotherly love, this friendship love. Today I want to give you 6 characteristics of that love that'll help us to grow in this friendship love. And for those that are married, I want you to consider these from the point of view of your marriage, your best friend. That first characteristic I have is unconditional love. Unconditional love. I'm sure we've all encountered type of people that are only there when the times are good, when it's convenient for them, when they're getting what they want out of the relationship, when it's good. I found a quote by that famous author, Anonymous, and it goes like this. It says, true friends aren't the ones who make your problems disappear. They're the ones that won't disappear when you have problems. That is godly wisdom. You can jot this down. Proverbs 17:17 says, a friend loves at all times. Friend loves at all times. See, true friends, they choose to focus on that outgoing concern, what they can give to each other, rather than what they may receive from a relationship. My best friend and I have been at this for almost 40 years now. We have what we call our dance. And we know what each other needs. We know what each other appreciates. We know how to push each other's buttons. It is our dance. And you don't really appreciate, all that familiarity until, for example, you go out to a restaurant and you see some young couple that's on a date. And they're trying really, really hard to impress one another. And sometimes it's nauseating, isn't it? And you get to the point where you're very thankful. I don't have to go through that. My friend and I have already built that relationship. We know there's that comfort level that's there. There's that security, isn't there, in that kind of friendship. Perhaps it's just lazy. I certainly don't want to have to go through that again. I've already got all of that. It makes you appreciate your spouse. There's this idea that person is not going to give up on you. Even when we might be not the best pleasant person to be around. And we're told in Mark 10, verse 45, that Christ said he didn't come to be served, but rather he came to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. And we know that's the ultimate example of unconditional love. He voluntarily laid down his life for people that weren't even born yet. We're all unworthy of what he did. So let me ask you this. Do we have a dance with our friend Jesus Christ? He knows our needs. He knows what gets us excited. He knows what aggravates us. And yet he loves us unconditionally. We have to ask, is that just a one-way relationship? Do we have a friendship with Jesus Christ? Have you ever thought of it that way? But how can you have a relationship with a being that you've never seen, you've never directly heard from, you've never touched? Nothing. How can you have that kind of a relationship? Well, we're told. Let's look in Matthew 25, verses 35 through 40. Matthew 25, starting in verse 35. Breaking into the thought here of Jesus Christ speaking in verse 35, he says, I was hungry, you gave me food. I was thirsty, you gave me drink. I was a stranger, you took me in. I was naked, and you clothed me. I was sick, you visited me. I was in prison, you came to me. And then the righteous will answer him, say, Lord, when did we see you hungry and feed you, or thirsty and give you drink? When did we see you a stranger and take you in, or naked and clothe you? Or when did we see you sick or in prison and come to you? And the king will answer and say to them, assuredly I say to you, inasmuch as you did it for one of the least of my brethren, you did it to me. So how we treat others, especially it says that those of the household of God, especially how you treat your best friend, is a direct reflection of our relationship with Jesus Christ. That's what he's telling us there. We must be self-sacrificing in our love for others, whether or not it's deserved, whether or not anything is even expected in return. And so that's our first characteristic, unconditional love. Characteristic number 2, support during trials. Support during trials. Oftentimes, it's very natural to want to steer clear of people when they're struggling, when they're facing difficult circumstances. And you look at that and say, why? Why would you not want to be there? And it's because we're not comfortable being around others that are hurting. See, in effect, what we're doing is we're entering into their pain. And it's uncomfortable, isn't it? What if we say the wrong thing? What if we do the wrong thing? What if we don't have those magical words? What if we can't make them feel better? What if we don't have that answer that's going to make it all right? Earlier I quoted Proverbs 17:17. It says, a friend loves at all times. Basically, that's only the first half of the verse. It ends by stating, a brother is born for adversity. So true friends are willing to endure discomfort so that they can be there for one another when needed. Let's look at an example of that. There's actually an example in the book of Job. The book of Job. We don't often consider this. Job 2. I want to look at verses 11 through 13. We often say a lot about Job's three friends. Usually it's not in a very positive light, but I want to look at it through the lens of friendship here. Job 2, verse 11. When Job's three friends heard of his adversity that had come upon him, each one came from his own place. Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, Zophar the Naamathite, for they had made an appointment together to come to mourn with him and to comfort him. And when they raised their eyes from afar, they did not recognize him. They lifted their voices and wept, and each one tore his robe, sprinkled dust on his head toward heaven. So they sat down with him on the ground 7 days and 7 nights. No one spoke a word to him. They saw that his grief was very great. You have to consider, I'm reading through that. Have you ever sat 7 days and 7 nights with someone not saying a thing? You think of the situation there. But look at the background. It appears here that his friends, they came from distant places just to see him. They weren't his next door neighbor. They didn't even come from the same town. They didn't even come from the surrounding area. And there's no cable news back then. There's no internet. There's no cell phones. They got this through word of mouth. And yet, when they heard, they dropped everything they were doing. They got together to come support Job. They came to mourn with him. And in those days, that entailed wailing and tearing your clothes, sprinkling ashes on your head. And they did that to comfort him. Now, Barnes' Notes says something interesting. It says that sitting with someone without talking wasn't an uncommon way to show comfort and respect for grief. But it was perhaps because they didn't know what to say. They had come to offer sympathy and consolation, but Job's situation and grief was more than they were expecting. Even though they may not have known what to say with him, they remained with him, even in silence. Like I say, just to consider that, they must have been good friends. So for our good friends, perhaps our best friend, especially our best friend, they should be a good listener. When everyone else has turned their back on them, when something has them down, when they need to talk, are we there to listen? May mean praying or fasting about their situation, perhaps sending a note of encouragement, perhaps providing practical help like supplying meals. In the case of Job, just sitting quietly, just to be there with that hurting friend. So when you show that kind of support, you show that proper friendship kind of love. Third characteristic, genuine happiness for each other's success. Genuine happiness for each other's success. Let's turn to Romans 12. Romans 12 and verse 10. Romans 12, verse 10. Paul says, "Be kindly affectionate to one another with brotherly love, in honor, giving preference to one another." So this is talking about love between brethren. It's talking about love between friends, this brotherly love. It's actually the word Philadelphia. The city. Philadelphia means brotherly love. It's interesting, look up where Philadelphia got its name. It's interesting. I'll leave you that to research that one. It's an interesting story. Notice here, kindly affectionate refers to a mutual love between parents or children or between husband and wife. So it's telling us that Christians should have a very common feeling toward one another as belonging to a family. We should have that kind of a relationship. We are united by the same principles. We're united by the same interests. But how much more even would that apply then toward our best friend? Now, Paul goes on here. He begins to list, and I won't go through this list, but he gives a list, some of the characteristics of such a friendship. But let's go notice verse 15. Verse 15. He says, rejoice with those that rejoice. Weep with those that weep. So when something good, or even says when something bad happens, who's the first one you reach out to? You think about that. When something happens, who do you reach out to contact first? For me and my best friend, the answer is simple. We reach out to one another. And it doesn't have to be anything earth-shattering. It can be something silly, something that one of us has seen and the other is not there to see. Perhaps you just saw something walking down the aisle of Walmart that you wanted to share, and you get a picture of that. I've even gotten pictures of the prices of eggs to be able to say, can you believe this? You're sharing with one another. Today, what passes for friendship is sharing things in an effort just to one-up someone else. You don't believe me? Look at social media. You have a global stage. You have the spotlight. And you're there to receive that well-deserved pat on the head for posting your life's experience. But for those people, their friendships consist of shares and likes and thumbs up. That's who their friends are. Now, in stark contrast, true friends rejoice at one another's achievements, their successes, their blessings. Everybody wants the other person to genuinely do well, even if it means I'm the guy that gets outshined if the other person does well. So to have that friendship love means you find happiness in someone else's happiness. Always cheering the other person on so that they can do their very best. As part of the marriage ceremony, as part of the marriage covenant, we turn to both the man and the woman and we ask them this: to love one another in sickness and in health, in good times and in difficult times. In other words, the trials and the successes. Do we share those with one another? Let's look at characteristic number 4. Edifying conversation. Edifying conversation. So when we have this friendship love, it allows you to sit down and to talk to your friends. And then afterward, you feel uplifted. You feel refreshed. You feel like you can go out and tackle new challenges, don't you? See, that's the way friends should affect us. It should have that effect on us. Do we feel better after talking to them? Let's go to Proverbs 17, in verse 17. It was in Mr. Johnson's seminar, and boy, he was bouncing all over Proverbs. He actually did hit one of these, but I won't tell you which one. Proverbs 17 or 27, verse 17. We're familiar with this. It says, as iron sharpens iron, so a man sharpens the countenance of his friend. International Standard Version says this: iron sharpens iron, so a man sharpens a friend's character. The word for friend here means a companion, means a brother. It means a husband or a wife. So it entails that brotherly love. Edifying one another can mean clarifying, deepening our understanding of God's Word. Do we talk to one another about God's Word? It can be sharing a life lesson. It can be a discussion of something new, something different that we have learned. It can mean learning what the other person likes in life, to be able to appreciate those things as well. I have friends, that, especially if you haven't chatted in a while, and we'll jokingly talk about, after we're done, we'll jokingly say, well, we didn't quite solve all the world's problems. We did leave a few to save for next time. But isn't that amazing? You can talk to these people literally about anything. With my best friend, I appreciate the perspective that she brings toward what I'm doing, toward my thought process. There are certain times I'm thinking along some lines and I'll be talking to her and she'll bring out a new thought, or perhaps the way she's looking at it, and it introduces something new to me. I change my message because of that thought process. And you have to appreciate that. You have to feel that God has a way of doing that as well. Your friend is there to help you in that. And it's not that everything that is said, everything that is done has to be deep or profound, but there's a safe haven to know that you have these friends that you can share different thoughts and ideas with. You know, in today's world, if you disagree, you hate me. You can't share thoughts to be able to expand your own thoughts. We should improve all areas of our life based on friendships that we have. Let's look at characteristic number 5, and that is gentle correction. Gentle correction. This is a tough one, because who likes to be corrected, right? Today's environment, we see today, speaking your mind. When people do that, they're always offending somebody, aren't they? It's almost considered a right. I have a right to tell you exactly what I think of you. Those true friends, those that are willing to express a love of friendship, they go a step further, though, don't they? They offer sincere, loving correction, but only when it's called for. The difference is this attitude of outgoing concern. Are you doing it just to get it off your chest, or are you doing it to help the other person? We're in Proverbs 27. Let's read verses 5 and 6. It says, open rebuke is better than love carefully concealed. Faithful are the wounds of a friend, but the kisses of an enemy are deceitful. Loving friends will tell you if you're making a mistake, a serious mistake in your life, even if it stings a little bit, even if it stings a lot. We all have blind spots. Sometimes we all need that other set of spiritual eyes to help us to stay on the right path. And as difficult as it may be for our friend to confront us, we also then have a responsibility. Is our responsibility to throw up that wall, tell them exactly what you think of them? No. We have to be open. We have to be willing to listen to our friends and what they have to say. And you may have to take a step back and say, ouch, that hurt. But you're right. You know, how many times do we brush off our friends when they're attempting to help us? And so that leads to where it gets tricky, and that becomes, we have people out there that will point out every fault, every idiosyncrasy. Should we do that for all of our friends? We shouldn't, should we? That's because usually our closest friends are those that are willing to overlook our flaws. And shouldn't we reciprocate the very same thing? We should be thankful for that. They know who we are and they love us in spite of that. However, when what we're doing is negatively impacting our spiritual lives, when it's impacting people we love, that steps outside of that zone. True friends will confront us. They will urge us then to change direction. Characteristic number 6, time spent together. Time spent together. See, you can't move beyond a casual connection to something that's more meaningful and that is deeper unless you truly get to know the other person. And you can't do that without spending time with them. That's especially true in marriage. And that is a key ingredient to growing this true friendship, this type of love that we have. You know, it's tragic, and I'm sure you've seen the examples as well of people that have been married 25, 30 years. Suddenly they get a divorce. And you look and say, wow, what happened? And what you find is that two people, they were in romantic love at one point in time, and then you see other things got in the way. The job, the hobbies, the kids. Then after that last child leaves home, you have two people there that now realize they no longer have anything in common. They spent their lives. He went his way, did his own thing. She went her way, did her own thing. And they never took that time to spend time together. That romantic love had faded. And there was none of this friendship love then left to fill the void. Two people had been together all those years. And you look at it, their marriage was only an empty shell. And it's sad when you think of that, but it happens more often than you would think. My best friend and I started out over 36 years ago. Just the two of us. Through the good times, through the difficult times, through the accomplishments, through the trials, we've always done things together. Different jobs have come and gone. Different houses have come and gone. 4 kids have come and mostly gone. And now we find increasingly it's still the two of us again. And that's not a bad thing. We're actually enjoying that. Why? Because we're best friends. Who wouldn't want to spend all that time with your best friend? We're in Proverbs. Let's go to Proverbs 18, verse 24. Proverbs 18, in verse 24. It says, a man who has friends must himself be friendly, but there is a friend who sticks closer than a brother. A Barnes note says of this verse, it says, it is not the multitude of so-called friends that helps us. They may only embarrass and perplex. What we prize is the one whose love is stronger and purer even than all ties of kindred. So it's not that casual, it's not that purely social friendship that it's talking about. See, they don't matter. Not as much as having a true friendship. But the point here is that if you don't then have some of these deeper friendships, you're missing out. God wants us to have those kind of friendships. Those that inspire, those that encourage us to persevere, to overcome, to grow, to expand. But see, it's a two-way street. It's because those friendships also give us that opportunity to support, to enrich the lives of our friends. That includes your best friend, first and foremost. So we've seen 6 characteristics of having true friendship. These things that will help us to have that brotherly love. But before we leave this examination of brotherly love, we have to stop and ask ourselves, why? Why is there this aspect of filial kind of love? Is it only so that our marriages can be better? Is it only so that we can have true friendships? You know, we're all huddled together on this ball called the earth, and we do have to get along. Is that why it's there? There has to be a reason, right? That we would have this kind of love. Let's look in John, the book of John, verse 21. I want to look at something interesting here. Perhaps will help us out in this. John 21, and this is the account. It's shortly after Jesus Christ's resurrection. And you see in this account, I'm not going to read through all of it, but 7 of the disciples are together. And it's Peter that decides that they should all go fishing. And so they do. They fish all night, and they catch nothing. And in the morning, you have a stranger out walking along the shore, and he asked them if they caught anything, and they said no. And he instructs them, throw your net over one more time. And they do. And then that comes up overflowing. And it was to the point it was almost breaking. And it was then that they realized that the stranger on the shore was Jesus Christ. And so they make their way to shore. And Peter is so excited, he's not even in the boat. He strips off his clothes, he jumps in the sea, he swims. Everybody else rows the boat back to the shore. Let's notice now verse 15. John 21 and verse 15. And so when they get to the shore, it is Jesus who fixes them breakfast, has them, pull out some of the fish, fixes some breakfast. In verse 15, when they had eaten breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter. So this is interesting. Everybody is there. You have to ask, why Peter? Why did Christ focus on Peter? And to understand, we have to consider the setting. Put yourself in the shoes of Peter. Passover night, this just would have been a matter of weeks before. He stood up, he said he would never stumble because of Jesus Christ. Christ told him he'd deny him 3 times before morning, and guess what he did? He'd done just as Jesus Christ had said. He was ashamed when he realized it, but now Christ had died, Christ was alive, and here he is back among them. Peter must have had conflicted feelings. He was overjoyed at seeing Jesus Christ yet again. They were good friends. And yet there has to be this weight on his shoulder. The weight of having made this serious mistake just a couple of weeks before. Would anyone remember? Would Jesus remember? Would he say anything? Would he do anything? The whole act of Jesus feeding them breakfast, that had to have been comforting. But now Jesus Christ turns and focuses on Peter. But let's continue on. Let's read verse 15 through 17 here. When they'd eaten breakfast, Jesus says to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of Bar-Jonah, do you love me more than these?" And he said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And he said, "Feed my lambs." Verse 16, he said to him a second time, "Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me?" And he said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And he said to him, "Tend my sheep." And he said to him a third time, "Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me?" Peter was grieved because he said to him a third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know all things. You know that I love you." And Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep." Now these 3 verses, there's enough information in here. You can dissect this. You can make an entire sermon out of this. But I want to focus on one aspect of it here. You notice that Christ asks of Peter, "Do you love me?" He doesn't say, "Do you fear me? Do you honor me? Do you admire me?" Rather, he says, "Do you love me?" Christ here, he's looking for proof of that love. You know, in Matthew's account, when Peter had realized that he had failed Jesus Christ after Passover, he had wept. And the question here is not, "Simon, how much have you wept for me?" or "How much have you fasted?" but rather, "Do you love me?" Now what's interesting, in these 3 verses, there are actually 2 different words for love that are being used here. And see, we read through this and we see love, love. Christ asks for love. Peter responds with love, and it goes back and forth. One of the words is phileo. It's that friendship love we've been talking about. The other word is agapeo, which is a derivative of agape, which is that godly love. So we're seeing 2 different kinds of love. Now, knowing that, let's go through and put these different types of love in. And I believe what we see is something interesting jumps out at us. Let's plug in the correct version of love. In verse 15, Jesus asked Peter if he agapeo, if he has that agape, that godly love. Peter's response was that he had phileo love, brotherly love. Again, verse 16, Christ asked if he has that agapeo love. Peter responds, he has phileo love. But then in verse 17, things change. The words in verse 17, Christ now asks if he has that phileo love. Peter responds that he does have that phileo love. It's interesting. You know, this is not a slight on Peter's part. In that conversation, there were 2 different words going back and forth. At that point, Peter simply wasn't capable of expressing godly love. It says he was grieved when Christ asked him a third time, "Do you love me?" And I believe it's difficult for us to comprehend the depth of what's going on here because we don't consider there are actually 2 words that are being used between Jesus and Peter. In our way of speaking, we might say something like, you know, if Jesus said, "Peter, do you love me?" And Peter would have responded, "Hey, we're best friends. I'd sure like you." It's like he couldn't comprehend the difference of what was being said. In his mind, he was saying the same thing, but there was a difference. And we see Peter was getting frustrated because Jesus kept asking him. So I have to ask, why is this narrative important? What is there about this that we should take care and pull away with today? So here Christ wants to know if Peter loved him. Loved him with a godly love. Not a human love, but a godly love. But as we saw, Peter was not at that time capable of giving that godly love. So how did he get that love? Jesus Christ actually gives the answer. Notice verse 19. It says he spoke, signifying by what death he would glorify God, talking about Peter. And then when he had spoken, said to him, "Follow me." That's the point. He says, "Follow me." I'm not promising you anything, but follow me. That's it. Get everything else out of your head. Focus on one thing. Follow me. So Christ was showing us that this filial love, this brotherly love, this friendship love can develop into agape love if we follow him. So there is a connection. Marriage is that vehicle that helps us to establish that connection. Let's go for final scripture, John 15. We're in John 15, verses 12 through 15. And I find it interesting. You can go back and read what Peter wrote in the book of 1 Peter, and he does express love. And when you look at the love in the book of 1 Peter, it's agape love. Peter got it. John 15, verses 12 through 15. Christ says, "This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, than to lay down one's life for his friend. You are my friends if you do what I command you. No longer do I call you servants, for a servant does not know what his master is doing. But I call you friends, for all things that I have heard from my Father I have made known to you." Now look at several things here. Love, and you have to go back after today's discussion. You have to say, what love? It's talking about godly love, that agape love. The word friends here, I call you friends, is philos. That's the recipient of that friendship form of love that we've been talking about. So we see that the highest form of godly love comes when you put your friends before your own life. It's that ultimate of outgoing concern. Christ calls us friends. He already laid down his life for us. He paid that ultimate penalty for us. And because of our obedience, we're no longer called servants or bondservants. We are friends of Jesus Christ and God the Father. So today we are to reflect the type of that relationship. And we do that by how we have friends today, how we show friendship, love toward others in our lives, and especially our best friend. Filial love is reflected in our friendships. That kind of love should be solidly grounded through our marriage. And we should see that it is then a stepping stone to something bigger and more important and greater, godly agape love. This type of love then, this filial love, this brotherly love, is kind of important, isn't it? And it's something we should apply to our lives. And it's something we should reflect on. I want to leave you with a question, and that is this: how are we doing with our brotherly love?